You're on Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Our guest is Oscar López Rivera, Puerto Rican independence activist freed last month after serving 35 years in prison. We're also joined by Juan Cartagena, President and General Counsel of Latino Justice. This is the time here in New York City that the Puerto Rican Day Parade is taking place on Sunday. It is also the day, Sunday, that the Puerto Rican referendum will take place in Puerto Rico. Juan?
Well, Oscar, I'd like to ask you about how you see Puerto Rico now, having come out of prison. The last time you were there was over 35 years ago, and now you're seeing a situation with total economic collapse and bankruptcy and imposed control board by Congress. What do you see as the situation on the island right now, and how it could possibly get out of its enormous crisis?
Puerto Rico is suffering an enormous crisis. Puerto Rico, as I see it, has been set up in a way that there's no way for Puerto Rico to lift itself up economically. First of all, the Junta de Fiscal Control, the Fiscal Control Board, has already spent a lot of money without offering Puerto Rico any remedy to resolve its economic problem. What it has done thus far is extract money from programs such as the University of Puerto Rico, such as the public education system, and other pensions from workers that will definitely make Puerto Rico's economy worse, much worse than it was last year or the year before. And Puerto Rico cannot pay that debt. It's impossible for Puerto Rico to pay that debt, except if every last dollar that the Puerto Rican worker has in his pocket is taken out of his pocket. That is the reality from the economic point of view. Besides that, we have a government in Puerto Rico, a colonial government in Puerto Rico, that has no way offer any incentives to the Puerto Rican people. On the contrary, it offers incentives to foreigners to invest in Puerto Rico. Whoever invests in Puerto Rico is not a Puerto Rican. What happens is that the money that is made in Puerto Rico is taken out of Puerto Rico. That money does not stay in Puerto Rico. It does not help the economy of Puerto Rico. So my way of looking at it is Puerto Rico is in trouble economically, and the Junta de Control Fiscal, the control board that is imposed or has been imposed on Puerto Rico, is really a detrimental, I would dare say, a criminal act on the Puerto Rican people. Now, there are other things in Puerto Rico that I see being positive. For example, I see the students at the university struggling. I see the students at the university trying to do something to preserve or at least protect the university. That is positive. The youth, the Puerto Rican youth, represent the future of Puerto Rico, and as long as they are struggling and doing something for the economy, doing something for themselves, doing something for Puerto Rico, there is hope. There is also another element that I see. Puerto Rico, as has been mentioned, is going into or is celebrating a plebiscite, another colonial act, and to justify what? Puerto Rico is not going to become a state, definitely not. And only one political party in Puerto Rico is going on this plebiscite, is participating in this plebiscite. The rest of Puerto Rico is boycotting the plebiscite. That money, $10 million that will be spent on that plebiscite, could go into at least the education system. We could preserve some of those schools that have been closed. 169 public schools are going to be closed. Why not use that money to help those schools? That will be one of the questions that I will ask the governor of Puerto Rico right now. He has been asked. He has no answers.
I was wondering if we can go back in time to your history, what politicized you, where you were born, how you came to head up the FALN, and then your 35 years in prison, how you survived there.
Well, I was born in a very small farm in Puerto Rico. At age 14, I was sent to Chicago to live with my sister. I enters high school, I'm going to make a little story here, so it will probably see my politics. When I was in high school in Chicago, the teacher asked the students to define a hero and why that person was our hero. So I had been, when I entered elementary school in Puerto Rico at age 5, every day we would sing a song that would say that George Washington was to be celebrated because he never said a lie. Okay, so on that particular day, I said that George Washington was my hero because he had never said a lie, and the students started laughing. I thought it was because of my English accent. When the class was over, a fellow student pulled me to the side and he said, "Don't you know that George Washington was a liar? You shouldn't have said that." So indoctrination was taking place in Puerto Rico in a very sophisticated, subtle way. I was deeply and profoundly indoctrinated into believing that Puerto Rico could never be an independent country, that Puerto Rico could not be self-sufficient, that we would starve to death if the United States would walk out of Puerto Rico. That's how I was influenced for the first 14 years in my life. Then in Chicago, I found myself facing things that I never thought I would face. For example, discrimination for the first time, finding racism for the first time, a real blatant racism, and discrimination when I was trying to find a job. In the military, I also found the same practice. You know, there was racism, there was discrimination. So when I came back home from Vietnam, and for some reason, Vietnam changed my way of life, my way of thinking. I came back from Vietnam, and I found myself obligated to find out what was the reason for the war in Vietnam. I found myself more sympathetic with the Vietnamese people than I thought that I would ever be. And little by little, I started to discover what Vietnam had done. For example, I discovered Dien Bien Phu, how the Vietnamese fought against the French, how did they colonize themselves. I came back to Chicago and I found a community of Puerto Rico.
You got a Bronze Star while
I
you
got
were
a
there.
Bronze Star for that.
And what was your brother doing during this time?
Who?
Your brother.
My brother? My brother was studying. But when I came back from Vietnam, I found a community, a Puerto Rican community that was beginning to wake up, to demand to be seen, to be heard, to transcend its marginalization. And I started organizing in the community. At that time, the Young Lords were coming up out of Chicago. It was a street gang that became political. A lot of things were happening in 1967. For example, it was 1967 when Dr. Martin Luther King pronounced himself against the war in Vietnam and called it a criminal war. 1967 was when Muhammad Ali refused to be drafted, and he paid a big price. And 1967 was the first time that I was invited by a nationalist, a Puerto Rican nationalist, to go to his house and listen to some tapes of the nationalists. And one of the tapes was Lolita Lebron, who had gone to Washington the 1st of March 1954. And she said in that interview that she came to Washington not to kill anyone, but to give her life for Puerto Rico. And when I heard that woman say that, I was amazed. I was amazed, and from that moment on, we started working on the campaign to free the 5. There were 5 Puerto Rican political prisoners, and from 1967 on, in Chicago, we started to organize a campaign for their release. By that time, Lolita Lebron, Irving Flores, Andrés Figueroa Cordero, Rafael Cancel Miranda had been in prison for 13 years, and Oscar Collazo López had been in prison for 17 years. And we believed that we should do something to win their release. And finally, in 1979, they were released from prison.
I wanted to ask you, when you were in Chicago, you helped to start a school, didn't you, in Chicago? Do I have it right? Luis Gutierrez was a student at that school? Or?
No, Luis Gutierrez was a tutor at the school.
Oh, tutor. Okay.
Yeah.
The now congressman.
Yes. In 1972, we started an alternative high school for high school dropouts. I have been involved in the issue of education since 1967. We fought to get schools built in the community. We fought to bring bilingual education into the schools. We fought to open up the doors at the universities, especially University of Illinois Chicago Circle and Northeastern universities, where programs were implemented to allow Latino students, because it was not only Puerto Ricans, we were also involved in helping the Latino population in general. So those programs still exist. The programs at University of Illinois, the program at Northeastern University, and our high school. Our high school is a really, really, really interesting project. It was based on Paulo Freire's pedagogy of the oppressed, and we were hoping that we would get dropouts, put them through a very rigorous educational system, and do it without any funds. What we did, we asked college professors to give us 3 hours for a class, and the students that were at the university that we had helped to get into the university, we asked them to be tutors. And that's how Congressman Gutierrez got to be a tutor at the high school.
Mm-hmm.
So talk about going to prison and what it meant for you in prison. You were in solitary confinement for over 12 years?
I was in solitary confinement for 12 years, 4 months. And first, from 1986, June 1986, in Marion, USP Marion in Illinois, until 1994. And then from 1994 to November 1996 in ADX. In ADX, for the first 58 days, I was awakened every half hour. 58 days straight. So that will give you an idea what it is to be in prison, to be under those conditions.
Well, I want to ask you in terms of the reasons for your being in prison. I mean, clearly the big narrative that you're seeing in the commercial media is this was a terrorist, this is a person who's unrepentant, this is a person who never should be allowed to be out free again. Is certainly not celebrated as a hero. The issue of the FALN's campaign of bombings that occurred in that period of time, you're retrospectively looking back at that, how you view that campaign, and how you feel about it now, and also the criticism that some people have that the organization participated in the killing of many innocent people.
First of all, I want to make this point clear. For me, human life is precious. I was in Vietnam. I hope and I pray that I never killed anyone. Now we know. If you're a soldier, you know when you have shot somebody, because there's a field of range that you're covering. And on my path, I never saw anyone being wounded or killed. So I can say that I came home from Vietnam without blood in my hands. I hope so. For me, the issue of human life is precious. Now, I've been asked over and over about the bombings. I've been asked over and over what took place. I can guarantee one thing, that I never participated in an act where we knew that a human life was going to be put in jeopardy, okay? Now, one thing that I want to make very, very clear, Puerto Rico as a colony has every right to its independence. It has every right. And by international law, Puerto Rico can use, Puerto Ricans who want to decolonize Puerto Rico can use all the means at their disposal, including the use of force. I'm not advocating for that. Let's make that clear. By 1992, all of us who were in prison have taken a position that we would not promote violence, that we were not going to be active in violence. In 1999, mostly all my co-defendants were released. Up to this time, almost 20 years later, there has not been not a single act, a criminal, any kind of violation committed by my co-defendants. that really should be the measuring point for anything. That should be the way that we should be seen. We left prison, we committed ourselves not to act violently, and thus far, no one can accuse us of doing so. Now, had there been any evidence against any of us, I guarantee you that I wouldn't be here today. Because the federal judge we faced, he told us that if the law would allow it, he would sentence all of us to death, if the law would allow it. And that sometimes the narrative is never talked about, but there's a narrative. Colonialism is a crime against humanity. We have to be clear on that. And Puerto Ricans, to tolerate colonialism, we are tolerating a crime. So I think that it's important to understand that we love Puerto Rico. I love my homeland. That's my homeland. That's my promised land. And the way I see it is that we have to decolonize Puerto Rico. Now, the issue of violence is no longer one that we'll ever entertain or that we'll ever promote. And let's be clear on that, because I think that it's important for people to know who we are as people, as human beings, because we love our homeland. We also love justice and freedom for the whole world.
I wanted to ask you then, along with that, the controversy now that we've had over the last few weeks, and which I believe people don't realize, there's Puerto Rican Day parades all over the United States, and I think you're supposed to be participating the following Sunday in the Chicago Puerto Rican Day parade. So, and Philadelphia has one, Boston, all these cities. So there could conceivably be this same controversy arriving in every city if all these parades decide to honor you or to have you participate in them. So I'm wondering what your sense is of how the corporations, because it's not just Coca-Cola and Goya and JetBlue, it's the Daily News, where I used to work, also pulled out. NBC, Telemundo also pulled out of the parade. Your sense of how these corporations are trying to impose their perspective on what is acceptable in these Puerto Rican Day parades?
Well, I think that every committee that is in charge of a parade has the right to do whatever it deems necessary to do. We have to respect that. It is their power to do so. Now, for me, corporations can do whatever they want to do with their money. That's their prerogative. But the prerogative of the Puerto Rican Day Parade in New York City to choose whomever it wants to choose to participate in the parade, it should not be determined by corporations. We cannot accept that. Let the Puerto Rican community, let the Puerto Rican committee make its decision, not to be imposed by anyone, not to be accepted. Because if we accept impositions, we will never move. We will never feel empowered to do the things that we need to do for our communities and for our people. It's a question of empowerment. That's fundamental in this issue, and I think people are overlooking that, because who can take the power away from this committee, from the particular committee that chose or decided to honor me? I do not need the honor, definitely not. I will march in the parade as a very humble Puerto Rican. That's who I am. I love participating in the parade. But what I would detest very, very much is corporations imposing their values or their ideals on a committee that has every power to decide for the Puerto Rican community what its parade should be. If they were to do that to the Irish Day Parade, I believe that the Irish would be awfully angry at that. It has happened in the past. And we should not. Puerto Ricans should not allow in any parade to be dictated who to participate or what to do with the parade.
Governor Cuomo also said he would not participate. Mayor de Blasio is marching in the parade, and he said, "I'm very happy Mr. López Rivera has declined the honor. I don't think it should have been offered to him. I think it's good he declined it because it was entirely distracting from the issue at hand, which is Puerto Rico." He said, "This is one of these things where you watch and recognize the most important thing is getting lost. 3.5 million people are being mistreated by their own government right now, by the U.S. government." What is your response to Mayor de Blasio saying he will march, but that he is happy that you declined the honor?
Well, if he's happy, that's great. I believe people should be happy. If he's happy doing that, as long as he doesn't tell the committee what to do. Now, he's not telling the parade committee what to do. So, if he's happy, great for him.
Did you decline the honor?
One thing for me, the issue became something that would make the parade less functional. It would divide people. There's no reason for that, and so for me, it was a question of who should be honored. And I think the Puerto Rican people should be honored. I believe that it should be a day of celebration for all Puerto Ricans, something that we can enjoy, something that we can really celebrate, and that's for me what matters the most. And I'll be marching to the parade.
And are you welcoming other people to join you as well?
I have asked many people to, and they're coming from Puerto Rico, they're coming from Chicago, they're coming from Pennsylvania. So even from Orlando, there will be some Puerto Ricans coming that we have invited. So hopefully that more and more Puerto Ricans will participate this year than the last year. So let's hope for that.
And what do you want to see for Puerto Rico now?
Well, I think that Puerto Rico, it should be seen as a place where decolonization can take place. I see Puerto Rico at a moment when the United States government has finally admitted that Puerto Rico is a colony. So for us, it's not the problem that we had before. For us, decolonization is possible. One of the things that I have talked about is that the common denominator among Puerto Ricans who love Puerto Rico is the love for Puerto Rico, and that decolonization could bring all Puerto Ricans from the diaspora and from Puerto Rico together to decolonize Puerto Rico, just based on the fact that we love Puerto Rico, that Puerto Rico is our promised land, that we need Puerto Rico to be decolonized. Colonialism is a crime. We should erase that. We should erase that and allow Puerto Ricans to exercise their self-determination and to make Puerto Rico the nation that it has the potential of being.
Well, we want to thank you very much, Oscar López Rivera, for taking this time on your time in New York as you march in the Puerto Rican Day Parade to make this your first interview in this visit. Thank you. Oscar López Rivera is a Puerto Rican independence activist who was freed last month after serving 35 years in prison. And we want to ask Juan Cartagena to stay, President and General Counsel of Latino Justice. I know you have many official visits to make and must leave the studio now. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This is Democracy Now! We'll be back in a minute. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Juan Gonzalez. Before we talk about the testimony of James Comey, we wanted to end our conversation with Juan Cartagena, President and General Counsel of Latino Justice.
Juan, I wanted to ask you again about this situation with the parade now and the enormous controversy and firestorm that's resulted, and how many leaders in the Puerto Rican community are reacting, because there's been a lot of attention on the corporations that have pulled out, but there are hundreds of community organizations that regularly participate in the parade. To my knowledge, none of them have pulled out.
That's correct.
So I wanted to get your sense of the impact on the community of this enormous firestorm over López Rivera being there.
Well, I think it's galvanizing many more people to show up for the parade. I mean, it's one of these things that everyone recognizes, that who are the corporations to tell us who to recognize and who to honor. I want to flip this around for a quick second. Could you imagine having this parade in June of 2017 and not inviting Oscar López Rivera? The criticism on the parade committee would have been just as big. We understand that he's a symbol of so many things, including resistance, that having him in the parade is just another way to elevate not only his personal story, but also elevate all we are as a people.
In fact, didn't the committee for years call for his release?
Of course. Of course.
The Puerto Rican Day Parade Committee.
This is the same committee that applauded Lolita Lebrón marching the parade. The same committee that dedicated a parade one year to Don Pedro Albizu Campos. So we're talking about an amalgamation of individuals for various viewpoints of the status of the island having that ability to be recognized by a parade.
And for young people who don't know who Don Pedro Albizu Campos was.
Albizu Campos, a nationalist leader of Puerto Rico, who was a famous attorney and dedicated his entire life to the independence of Puerto Rico, and was also, by the way, convicted of sedition. And Oscar said it so well today. Up until the 1980s, for 50 years, the crime of seditious conspiracy was only lodged against Puerto Rican independentistas. So it's an amazing place to be now that he's finally free and able to talk about these things.
And so, and the reactions of the politicians, Mayor de Blasio, Governor Cuomo, Chuck Schumer.
Cuomo won't be marching.
Cuomo won't be marching.
Schumer will not be marching.
Yeah,
Schumer's not marching.
Yeah, Schumer's not marching.
Mayor de Blasio is.
De Blasio is. Of course, Melissa Mark Riverito will be front and center. She has been a champion of this cause for so long. She needs to be applauded. And so many other elected officials will be there.
She welcomed Oscar López at the airport last night. She went there to...
I'm sure she would, and I'm sure she did, because that's exactly who she is. I understand the Bronx Borough President, Ruben Diaz Jr., will be there. There'll be many people. And Oscar said it so well today. This is a celebration of the entire diaspora and the people of Puerto Rico. There are many other honorees. There's incredible honorees from music, from baseball, up and down the line. So I look forward to marching, and we all look forward to being Puerto Rican for a day.
The Yankees pulled out?
Yes, Yankees also. They were one of the first ones to pull out, yes. Not unexpected, you know.
Well, I want to thank you, Juan Cartagena, and final comments that you have on this very significant day that is not only the day of the New York Puerto Rican Day Parade, but it's also the day of the plebiscite in Puerto Rico that several of the parties are boycotting.
Sure. And the ironies are just enormous here, right? We're celebrating a day in which we, as a country, try to celebrate yearly, and this is an amazing opportunity for us to elevate the voices of so many Puerto Ricans across the board. The fact that I get to see Oscar López Rivera free after I visited him in a penitentiary in 2015 with Natasha Banan from my office, who's also the president of the National Lawyers Guild. We both went with his attorney, whose name needs to be elevated all the time. Jan Sussler is an amazing attorney. And what she has done to ensure his commutation is something that has to be applauded. So we thank her, and I actually live to see the day that Oscar can breathe as freely as anybody can in a colonial regime.
And this is the, you mentioned a colonial regime, this is the 100th anniversary of the imposition of U.S. citizenship by the U.S. Congress in 1917. A citizenship that was imposed despite the complete opposition of the elected leaders of Puerto Rico who voted against it. It was still imposed on Puerto Rico.
That's right, Juan. Another level of contradiction.
And yet still, Puerto Ricans cannot vote for President of the United States.
Yes.
That's correct.
Well, thanks so much.
Thank you both of you for doing this.
Juan Cartagena, President and General Counsel of Latino Justice.